Excellent. Well, thank you again for having me back. So thank you, Renata, and thank you to everyone coming in. I always really appreciate that you give up some of your time. And I just really enjoy being with the childcare providers. The enthusiasm is always so high. I think the conversation is really always ends up really interesting. So yes, this is me. I'm an independent nurse and sleep consultant. I'm also multiply neurodivergent and have kids that are as well. And I work pretty specifically to support people that are like me and try to understand myself better, to be fair. And I really enjoy teaching other people like childcare providers in order to support neurodivergent young people. So sleep became really at the forefront of my mind because sleep was always a big issue for me personally. And I wanted to understand myself better. And then with working with neurodivergent people, sleep comes up so much. And there's still a lot that we don't know and still stuff that we're questioning. So I think it's great they're having these conversations. And so I'm really curious what you end up thinking after this and what your questions are going to be, to be fair. Okay, so the first slide is more of a little bit of a review, just to make sure if someone didn't come to one of the previous webinars, I always like to make sure if there's a few terms I'm using that we're all on the same page. I don't want anyone to ever come in and think, oh gosh, I'm already behind. So real quick, there's that term up there, the neurodiversity, and it's that term I should signpost back to Dr. Nick Walker, Harvey Bloom, and Singer are the people that did a lot of research around this term and bringing it to all of us. And just that idea that we know we don't all think the same. And so it's literally that just our brains vary from person to person. On the left is that term neurotypical. And these are people that, for the most part, most structures like school and work, and even social activities are typically built around their way of thinking. And then on the right side are all of us neurodivergent people who these systems, sometimes we struggle in them because they're built in ways that maybe don't make sense to us, and we might need some accommodations. And actually, let's bring up a good point. Sometimes people think that neurodiversity, they really tend to think of just autistics, but actually quite a lot of us.
Someone
Eloise, go ahead.
HBI, what's that?
I was just going to ask the same question.
Oh, good. Bipolar, PDA, DCD. What is DCD?
Where are we? Is that for dyspraxia, the coordination disorder? Okay. Oh, high potential intellectual. Well, I'm not as familiar with that. PDAers, I'm a PDAer. Yes, we're in there. And yes, development. Thank you for clarifying that with DCD. Dyslexia, yes, 100% is in there. And we estimate that maybe close to around 10% or more of the general population are dyslexics.
Wow.
So it's a huge amount of people. And that's actually kind of the point from all of you putting in all these different groups. So thank you so much, is that it actually is a lot of people. So when we think about putting in the 6 dies, I'm not quite sure what that's referring to, Diana, but if you want to flesh that out, I'm interested to hear. But when we think about creating accommodations and supports, it actually can help quite a lot of people. So like in the like this last weekend, when we're talking about that school setting, oh, cerebral palsy, yes, it is. I got to be with some really fabulous kids yesterday with cerebral palsy. They are definitely under that umbrella and deserve all the accommodations to thrive as well. So thank you for that one too. So yeah, there's quite a lot of us that are in this umbrella. And I'm going to swing it over. So the first one that I decided to put in here is around co-occurring medical conditions. And I touched on this in some of the previous webinars, but it really is something to have at the forefront of our minds, even with talking about sleep. So co-occurring, that term, it just means at the same time. So it's someone that is ADHD and also has a medical condition at the same time. And this is really, really prevalent. Some other neurodivergent friends and I actually last week were in a group Zoom and something got said. We were discussing a friend of ours that was having surgery. And we were saying, gosh, are there any of us that don't have a medical condition or chronic illness? And we were scrolling through our friends on social media and going, I can't think of anybody that doesn't. And obviously, if we're the adults that are neurodivergent with these medical conditions, we were children with them or many of us started with these as children and sometimes didn't get it recognized until we were adults, despite that we had a lot of pain as kids as well. So I just wanted to bring it up because it's something to be thinking of if a child's struggling with sleep, that assessing for pain, including dental pain, is really high at that list. And you can do this with some different, if you're not quite sure, there's some different tools that you can find online. There's one called FLAC, it's FLACC, yes. And it's just to help you with looking at the young person and kind of trying to suss out, are they in pain? And so the F stands for face, maybe they're grimacing or tightening their jaw. There's also legs, like a lot of movement around, that's also tied with A for activity. And then we're also thinking about, are they crying, C, and then are they able to be, are they consolable? Are we able to provide support with that movement goes away? So there's a lot of things you can look at online to help try to decide, is this person in pain when they're sleeping? And of course, if you think there's any pain, to make sure to talk to the parents and any relevant medical providers. Let me just move this real quick so I can see the rest of my slide. Oh, medications. Well, where there's medical conditions, there's medications. And sometimes these do affect sleep. Sometimes they're in that tiny, tiny writing. And sometimes someone might forget to share that, oh, this medication that they're on might affect their sleep, especially if there's multiple medications. So it's a good time to say to the parents, maybe we should take them all out and have a look at them, or maybe they need to go in and talk to the medical provider and assess that again. I put anxiety as its own separate one. And of course, anxiety actually is quite the theme going for the whole webinar, and it can be for so many reasons. It really just points to being really, really curious, because the box below it talks about this idea of rest and digest comfort. So they're kind of tied to this next point I want to make, is when we're going into sleep, that's the side of our nervous system, that parasympathetic nervous system. So it's the rest and digest system. And when we go into that mode, that's when our digestive system, that GI system, is a bit more active. And so what can happen is someone might be doing pretty okay. And then actually when they go into more of that sleep mode, their digestive system, if they have something that's like on the left, we have so many connective tissue disorders, and they really affect our GI system. So if a kid has that and now going into sleep, we might be seeing pain that they didn't have during the day, and now it's presenting at nighttime. And that can be a bit confusing because obviously little people struggle to make those connections and struggle to communicate with that. So what we see instead is just that bedtime refusal, and just that anxiety and maybe anger and crying. So again, unfortunately, it's really a tricky one to start to suss out, but it is something to, take seriously, really suss out, discuss with the parents, encourage maybe having a discussion with the doctor of this child's presenting with a good amount of anxiety and pain at nighttime. And we're concerned that maybe there's something else, an underlying medical condition, because it is quite common for us. Okay. So this is a big topic, one that usually gets quite a few hours on its own because it's pulling out polyvagal theory. Thank you, Dr. Stephen Porges. But neuroception is something that we talk about a lot in our neurodivergent communities. It is, as this quote says, it's a really ongoing process. It's taking the information from what's going on around us and the information what's going on inside of us to decide, are we safe? And we're constantly asking ourselves that question. Do we feel safe? Do we feel comfortable? So like in this moment, we're not on our here, we're sat in front of our computers, we're having this chat. So you're probably thinking, yeah, I'm pretty safe. Nothing to tell me I'm not safe. If we got up and started screaming and running, you'd be thinking, oh, nope, not safe, right? So that's the system to help you make those decisions. What's really interesting, and we're not sure why, but neurodivergent people have what's called a more sensitive neuroception. So meaning that we are more likely to decide that we are unsafe. So that's that point on the left. So we're more likely to detect something that makes us feel unsafe. And it might be a perceived danger as well. So again, it might be a child that you see like in a toddler group, and they do not want to leave their caregiver. And the other kids are playing and running about, but they're really struggling to leave their caregiver because they've just decided this just doesn't feel safe for me. And another time you can see that too, and I had this with my kids, is trying to leave a room, trying to go to the bathroom for a minute. These are often the kids that feel like they go into great distress when you go off to the toilet. And even if it's just for that quick moment, not being able to see your caregiver can really throw us into distress right away. And so it's that following you into the other room, not because they want to show you something and they're still really excited. It's because they're incredibly distressed that they'll be separated from you. So the point on the right then that comes out of that idea of having a more sensitive neuroception is that we are incredibly reliant on our safe people. We really need our safe people around, and we really need support with co-regulation. That's like the basis of how we can emotionally regulate, is with our care providers. So when we think of how that's going to be affecting sleep, the tricky bit is if we feel unsafe, that turns into, we've activated our alarm system, that internal system. And so we've gone into that fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? So do the young people need to feel safe to sleep? I see some answers coming. Oh, I double clicked it. Yes. Yeah, we really do need to feel safe to sleep. So where this comes in is, oh, I accidentally hit my button. There we go. Where this comes into play is really then prioritizing time together. First step is daytime, to make sure we really spend time together to co-regulate during the day. It's a big theme throughout this webinar, is thinking about daytime, thinking about schedules. If you take nothing else from this, is thinking about daytime and how it affects sleep. We have so many young people that are in school all day and that go to all these different activities and can be just really packed. And then you think, well, now they've been separated from their caregiver, separated from safe people, like maybe other siblings, or another really close friend that they feel very safe and comfortable with. And then we're expecting them to sleep right away. But we haven't really filled that tank of co-regulation yet. And so what you can imagine happens is a lot of that really filters over into nighttime. And so that second question is then, for a lot of neurodivergent kids, particularly PDAers, the number one sleep strategy that comes out then is co-sleep, which is not always what families want to hear, but we really press on. We really need to focus on co-regulation then during the day. Really rethink of that schedule. Is there times that we can just really cut out some of these activities? Can we cut out maybe the extra trips to, the grandparents' house, and really ensure that we get that co-regulation during the day? Because otherwise it will spill over into the night if that person hasn't had that sense of safety. I'll go to the next one.
I just want to say,
go ahead.
Susan said, I wish I knew this about sensitive neuroception when my sons were little. I think that's quite common that parents will find out later. Yeah. And there is no such a thing as parenting without the guilt, right?
Yes, I really appreciate that comment. I feel like I say it every day when I'm working, is a lot of what I teach is because it was the stuff I was really struggling with when my kids were little. I mean, my kids are still relatively little, so I'm still making mistakes. I'm sure of it. It's that whole idea, hindsight, and a lot of this information, so much of it is just only now being disseminated. So while the theory around polyvagal and this idea of neuroception has been around for a few decades, but it was mainly in academia. It takes decades to come out to everyone, and for not, people that don't give lectures to really put it into pieces of our day to day. And that's really just been in the last 5 years. And so I know I end up with a lot of guilt. I think we all end up with a lot of guilt, no matter how hard we're trying. And I think it's just that idea we were saying before we started, we're just trying our best. We're just trying our best.
And neuroception is relevant for adults as well. We affect each other. So even your children are now older, that's, you can perhaps practice it now. And yeah.
That's actually a huge piece of it. It's like that it's always relevant. It's never too late. And again, we always try to do our best. And there's discussions around this idea of co-regulation and attachment, that when parents say, oh, it just sounds like I'll never be perfect, I'll never be this perfect caregiver. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be tired. There's some discussions in some of the papers around, well, how often do we need to get it right? And it's actually closer to like less than half. So you're like, if you're because the other times you can do repair if you make the mistake or you weren't around, to just say, I'm so sorry, I wanted to really spend time with you, but I'm here now. And just letting them know that you do care. So it's always just that idea of not every day is going to be perfect. And that idea of putting that onto ourselves, even as a nanny, you still have like a million things going on and there might be lots of kids. It's just those little moments. And it turns out those little moments really add up, really add up.
I think it's a Dr. Tronick, his study, he says the 30% it's enough to be a super parent when you connect properly with the child. So
oh, so he probably pulled that. I'll have to get that name. I posted to
Dr.
take that
Tronick.
name down. He probably pulled that piece out too. I think it's a really important thing to tell ourselves because we simply can't meet everyone's needs all the time. We simply can't. Let me make sure I'm getting back to here. Oh, so there's quite a few families, particularly with the PDAers. So PDAers are the type of autistics that we're kind of confusing for people to pick out because we're not really what's quite as expected. And then our neuroception in particular, for some reason, we sense fear, or we are fearful, very, very common. This has made a huge difference for me to understand. And actually, it's still really relevant to me, where if my spouse isn't around in the evening time, we used to call it that I went weird. I never understood what happened. I would go from working and being in this really productive nurse and taking care of my kids to where I really struggled to put my thoughts together. I would find myself with my laptop, the TV on, my phone, and the iPad. And I've now come to understand I was just trying to create the sense of company. I really struggled to be alone. I want either then my kid nearby, my spouse for overnight. And so I really kind of understand this theory around it, going, oh my gosh, that's me to a T. My younger kid is like this. So actually we've moved into that. For him, co-sleeping means with his brother. And that took us by surprise because he was awake all the time. And we thought, no way this is going to work. But actually he was waking up a lot to find safety, to find somebody else. And so when we put bunk beds in, it was like night and day. And then the co-sleeping could also be with a pet. Some of the teens don't want to co-sleep, but really do need the sense of someone else there. So I have quite a lot of teens that like those teddy bear, like the teddy bears, but maybe not a teddy bear, where you can put the heartbeats inside. It's just kind of sensing that someone else is around or that you're not by yourself, if that makes sense. And I know for some families, if they hear the word co-sleep, can be not what they're wanting. And that can be a really tricky conversation. And so we really press on, well, let's really focus on just getting sleep now. And so maybe just for now, let's make this adjustment and just get sleep. Because if you're coming to me and saying you're zombies, everything's falling apart, no one's getting any sleep, this has been this way for 5-6 years, they don't stay in the room, let's just get some sleep for some weeks and go with it. While in the meantime, really focus on that daytime, really suss out what can be taken out from this kid's schedule, and really focus on creating great connections throughout the day. Because when we do that, you're building that sense of safety. And that's when we're able to separate. Once that safety is there and all that attachment's really secure, then we're able to manage with that separation. All right, I think I can move on to the next one. Okay, so basically the next few, and actually the rest of the webinar is, there's so many things to say about neurodivergent people and sleep, but it's a shorter webinar. So I decided I would focus in then on the comment that comes up so much is about how late a young person stays up. And then I pulled out 3 different potential reasons. I'm hoping that gives a lot of insight to then address what is typically one of the most commonly brought up issues that a family has, so that when they describe them as night owls or just staying up really, really late. So I'm sure that sounds pretty familiar to some of you. So we'll go to the first one to suss out. I don't tend to use this phrase quite as much, but it's really it's used a lot in society around adults, but I think kids do this too. Again, we put them in this long day, they have all these activities, and a parent will say, well, they were in school, that's like 8, 9 hours. And then they went to football. And then you're thinking, well, that's another 2 hours. So the expectation of coming in around 8 p.m. and going to bed around 9, that's just really fast. Again, just going to that point of here's someone that just hasn't had time to regulate yet. We talk about in neurodivergent culture, that first blue bubble on top about self-led time, important for everybody, but really particularly important to us is to have that time where you're just in charge of yourself. So coming home from all these activities, making sure this person has what seems to be enough time to watch TV, go on their video games, chat to a friend, do what they want to do on their own timing. So again, this is really focusing in on that daytime. If sleep is an issue, we tend to say to people, I know they might be enjoying all their activities, and so it's a really hard choice. But if we've decided sleep is a priority, we really need to think just for now, and maybe just for a couple months, of really reducing that timetable. Let sleep happen, and then we can add things back in. Another point on this is, I think it's with this page too. Yes, is during all these activities, young people are pretty much in the activities and school where it's adult-led. There's high behavior expectations, and there's a lot of executive function pressure. So that's skill set that we've talked about before, but it has to do with that frontal lobe part of the brains, all those skills around emotional regulation, completing tasks, being able to perform in a group. And so it's a lot of pressure, it's a lot of demands, and they're facing that then for hours at a time. So it makes sense that we really need to create time for them to let all that go. So again, the expectation then when parents will say, well, I want them in bed by 8:30, but if they're coming in at 8 o'clock, I go, well, it's an unreasonable expectation. Something else needs to move. Either the bedtime, we just are fine with it being later, so that way they've had time to regulate, or maybe we can pull something earlier into the day so that way they can come home earlier, start to cool down and start to regulate, and then they'll be ready for bedtime. And another layer to this is in all of these activities, very often the neurodivergent person is in the school setting or in these activities where they're not neurodivergent led. So meaning this person is typically having to spend most of their day masking, or in that conscious or unconscious process of trying not to fidget, trying not to stim, trying to give eye contact, trying to fit in. And that's also exhausting. So again, pointing to that schedule and trying to reduce how much pressure is on this person, or again, realizing that was another layer of pressure. So that means we are even more needing this regulation time in the evening to just let it go, somewhere to just be in their safe space at home before we can expect them to be ready for bed, if that makes sense. It's all that time. It's just so long days. I feel it too. Let's see. So that's usually the first thing that I look at when families say that their child's going to bed way too late. This is kind of the first thing I try to suss out, say, all right, let's look at this daytime. The next one, I'm kind of smiling because this is me, demand avoidance. I hate getting ready for bed. Oh, I don't care how old I am. This is still a problem for me. But so we'll want to link this back to that neuroception. So that process we have for deciding whether or not we're safe. And if we decide we're unsafe again, that's when we kick off that alarm system. So going into that fight, flight, or freeze. So that's when we kick out all those hormones to activate us. This happens to us when then something is done that goes like against who we are or against our traits. So again, that idea, the first trait we talked about was the co-regulation. So if we don't have co-regulation, that makes us feel unsafe. There goes our alarm system. Another one is we tend to find demands very worrying and can make us distressed. So demands are those things that tell us to do something. And we tend to feel out of control. It tends to make us feel worried that someone's trying to control us versus being like a partner with us. This is part of a huge discussion around who PDAers are. So I'm trying to put it into a little bit of a nutshell. So if it doesn't quite make sense, have me say it again in a different way. So go into the chat if you're not sure. But essentially, for a lot of neurodivergent people, demands to us, so the whole thing of having an adult tell me, go put on your PJs, go brush your teeth, will tick me off. Where another kid could hear that and it's just like, oh, it's time for bed. That to me will feel patronizing. Even when I was a kid, I would say it to my parents all the time. It's like, why do you talk to me that way? Which of course caused arguments. Didn't go over very well, but it would make me feel like as if I didn't know what I needed to do. And it would make it feel like, well, why do I have to follow you right now? And it would just tick me off. And I never understood it until now. Thank you to all this great research. It makes me feel really out of control. And so it makes me feel very distressed. So then we end up digging our heels in and refusing to take part in bedtime. How else people see this? When a caregiver will be like, right, it's bedtime. And you get that young person who is maybe nicely playing Legos or chilling out on the couch, all of a sudden, boom, they're up off that couch. They're running around the house. They might be yelling at you. They're really, really activated. And that is again, because that neuroception decided these demands are making you unsafe. So kick off your alarm system, increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, increase your blood glucose, and start running around. And so that's where we see a lot of that demand avoidance. So they're trying, their bodies just don't want to give in. And so the best thing to do in these moments, if you have someone that does this regularly, is not to get into a battle. Because if it's a neurodivergent person, it is quite literally they're now in this alarm state and are a lot more out of control of their critical thinking. So getting into an argument with us is not going to go anywhere. And now we're just having this battle before bedtime versus working together. And a phrase I needed to use quite a bit last week and some other work was, there are no winners and losers. It is okay that if someone gets really distressed and is showing you that maybe this didn't go over well, trying to initiate bedtime, it's okay to say, you know what? I can see that you're upset. Let's just reconvene in a few minutes. Let's just take a step back and let things cool down, because that person's alarm system needs to cool down. I wanted to bring up the point about some of the hormones, because then people will say, well, then they were really upset and I went back in like 10 minutes and then it still didn't work to try to help them to go to bed. We have lots of hormones going on in our bodies, quite a few for that alarm system. And some of them, actually quite a few of them, they are very quick acting. So when we get distressed, they get pushed out into our bloodstream. But luckily, a lot of those come in very quick and leave very quick. However, cortisol stays a very, very long time. The half-life of cortisol, the half-life means how long does it take to get half of it out of our system? It's on the order of hours. Wow. So we really do not want to be creating these battlegrounds before bed, because now you're looking at needing to step back from this person for quite a long time. If you do get into one of those scenarios, it's not lost. We just want to make sure we just go into co-regulation mode. Just stop it right there. We don't prolong it. Just chill out next to them for a little bit longer and realize we need to approach it a bit different, which we'll go into in just a minute, particularly with those with demand avoidance, because it's a bit of a tricky stepwise, because you think, well, I'm just going to do that over and over and over again. So then, yes, let's go to that activity and use the chat. But real quick, let me just double check, because I see the number go up. Cortisol, yes. Oh, thank you for typing that in.
Alicia is saying that high level cortisol hinders production of melatonin.
Yes, it does, and serotonin. So that which makes us feel even more kind of down in the dumps and more unsafe. So we really want to create just like this really cozy, lovely time in that evening. Lots of attachment. Oh, thank you, Suzanne. No, definitely with the demand avoidance and particularly PDAs, but a lot of neurodivergent people, unfortunately, being told what to do is just really, really tricky, isn't it? So I thought what we could do is just do a mini activity to try to understand that a little bit better. So you could use the chat if you want to. And it was that idea of, let's say there is a kid who's in their family room playing with Legos or doing a puzzle, having a lovely time. And we've decided, oh, it's bedtime. Could we go into the chat and start listing out all the things that usually go into bedtime routine, going from this kid is playing again with, let's say Legos, and we want to go into bedtime. What are all the things that usually happen? Go ahead.
Well, people are writing, Lisa is saying, please enlighten the health visitors with this.
I'm trying.
Yeah, we have to try. We have to try. It actually worked for my son in his school, because my son, when he started secondary school, really struggled with anxiety. And we managed to, because I knew a little bit of biology of sleep and anxiety, I persuaded the pastoral care officer, and she let my child to go to school whenever he wants in the morning, so he can catch up with the sleep, so he doesn't come anxious. And guess what, guys? He never came late, because knowing that he can come late just took away that anxiety. That would be amazing if school could work with the children like that. It would really, really change, because we were very worried at that time. He really struggled. Anyway,
no, actually,
coming on, yeah.
So there were so many. I need to scroll back. Thank you. So,
oh wow,
warning of play, bath time, calm. Yes. Bath, shower, switching off there. And actually, one of the points to bring up is that each of those activities are actually lots of tasks and demands, right? Bath and shower is usually having to maybe go upstairs or down a hall. It's entering a new room, taking clothes off, being part of maybe putting on, having to clean yourself. There's so many steps to each of these. Yeah. Cleaning teeth, washing, getting dressed, books. Finish the play. You caught that one too, because transitions are really hard. So yeah, having
switching
to stop
off that electronics. Lights.
Those are hard.
Announcement.
Build a boat for bath. I love that one. That's quite specific, but that's fantastic.
Which one?
Jane put in build a boat for the bath.
Oh,
I love how some kid must absolutely love that and need that. Pictures can be really helpful to help guide these things as well. Yeah, definitely warnings are helpful. But I think the point of going through this, and I think you all did a great job, there's a lot of things that go on in bedtime. It's a huge list. And so I was just explaining that, unfortunately, for a lot of neurodivergent people, not all of them, but for some neurodivergent people, again, demands can be really distressing. So if we have a bedtime routine that has a huge list of demands, it can actually really be counterproductive. Now, the confusing bit is because there are autistics who absolutely love a routine. So make your routine, go through routine. That's fantastic. So we're talking about the people that routine is actually really distressing and incredibly dysregulating. So what we do is we first think of unblocking those demands, because we just talked about all these things that go into this bedtime routine. It's a huge block of them. So we want to think first of, what could we do earlier in the day? You know, what if we brushed our teeth at this time? What if they got in their pajamas and sleep clothes earlier? Or what could we just skip? Because we don't necessarily need a bath every night. We don't necessarily have to wear these pajamas every night. So it's letting neurodivergent people have less on their list to do. So that way, the ones that we really actually would like them to do, like a lot of people want to prioritize the teeth brushing. You're more likely going to get the teeth brushing if we can reduce the other ones out of there or bring them to earlier in the day. Another one is the idea about sharing these tasks. I think we hit this point in our culture where we want kids to be doing something really independently. So I always bring it back to our priority was on sleep. So let's take it back to that. So I don't care how old the kid is. If we're going to help them with putting toothpaste on their toothbrush to take that step out for them and clean up the sink for them, I really want them to get some sleep to take care of their health and mental health. That's always the priority, because then I'll get more sleep and my mental health will be better. And we can maybe the next time figure out a step of independence. So share those things together. And another one that I find really, really helpful is making it not just only sharing the demands, but sharing the experience. And this was something that it was like a light bulb moment one day of, I used to work more inpatient, and I did a lot of volunteer work with older adult care. And we did a lot of what was called shared experiences of doing for a lot of the self-care. And I thought, oh my gosh, that would be perfect with my neurodivergent kids, because it's this idea that when it's a lot of the self-care tasks like bedtime, we typically are doing things to the young people, like we're going to brush your teeth, you're getting dressed, I'm reading you this book, I'm putting you in this bed. And but we know that a lot of neurodivergent people, particularly autistics, we don't like to feel on display. It kind of feels like it's a spotlight, and that makes us feel really uncomfortable. And so we can really fight back a lot on these tasks, because it just feels really, we feel really exposed. And so it can feel a lot nicer and easier and a lot more gentle, where we're all going to brush our teeth right now. And I often do that with my kids, but I'll brush them again later, because now I can stay up a bit later. But it's like, we're all going to pick out our book that we're going to read. We're all brushing our teeth. You're helping me brush my teeth. It's like that whole teamwork, going back to teamwork versus that hierarchy of parent or childcare provider and kid. Let's just all be kind of doing it together. Because again, neurodivergent people don't like hierarchy. We don't tend to see it. That's our biggest issue in schools. And teachers have a hard time with that, because we tend to talk to teachers like they talk to us. And sometimes the teachers, if it's ones that have a more of a traditional approach, that doesn't work. So we work on that in the homes as well, of realizing a lot of neurodivergent people just don't see those rules, those social rules, the unspoken ones. So it's great to be thinking of, well, how can we help with the self-care tasks in a way that is a team? If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. I see a couple of things in the chat, so we'll just go there quick. And again, I can feel my voice feeling a little hoarse. I hope it sounds okay, though. It's not too bad with this asthma.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
Oh, thank you. Feeling your comfort. Oh, yes, all the comforting things for sure. All the loveys. We have lots of loveys and blankets in our house. The next one to talk about for people staying up late. So those are the first real two big approaches when someone's saying this person's going to bed so late. What can we do? Really suss those two out first, because then this is our circadian rhythm differences, which means that we have this 24-hour clock. Not quite everybody, but most people have a 24-hour clock, and our hormones and bodies kind of live on this cycle. And that's really true of our nighttime. What that also means, though, is we're all different people with different bodies. We don't all get tired at the same time, and we don't all wake up at the same time. And there are people who have then what's called delayed sleep phase. In medical, it's called delayed sleep phase syndrome. I kind of just see it as delayed sleep phase, because it seems like just a normal difference, where these are people who tend to go to bed later than their average peers and want to wake up later than their average peers. So you might have a young kid that's 7 that just naturally goes to bed around 10 and wants to wake up more around 9. So this is where, and actually, Renata, your example is a great one, in a way of this. The main reason why this is an issue for families is because of school. It's because of school, because it really makes sense that we don't all go to bed at the same time. So again, suss out all those things that we were discussing in the last slides first, and it might help you see, like, is this really someone who circadian rhythm difference, or were they not able to go to bed because of anxiety? So if we help put in supports and accommodations first, we can see, is this someone who just normally goes to bed a bit later? Trying to think if I have something else.
In our case, my son used to wake up about 3 o'clock at night and couldn't go back to sleep until about 6. So he would wake up and being anxious and couldn't fall asleep. But then when he didn't have that problem that he needs to go to school, he just woke up and then fell asleep.
It just takes that huge amount of pressure off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I didn't add it in because it's a shorter webinar, but I feel like I want to say it. But what you're explaining to could be, it's described as 2 different ways, is like the creative hour amongst neurodivergent people, the waking up between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning, or it's also related to adrenal fatigue from anxiety. And there's some things to do with that, but it's usually
I look
linked to
into it. He's
anxiety.
very creative.
Yes. And so it's when a lot of, in adults, it's more, it's considered appropriate, it's not the right word. But it's when a lot of like authors will say, oh, I just got inspired at like 2 a.m. and got up and wrote my book. Or like someone will say, I just felt like I had to get up and paint. I have some family members, older family members, my grandparents that did the same thing. So it's more of an issue now because then you didn't quite get the hours you needed to sleep. At the same time, that also can point to a blood sugar issue related to adrenal fatigue. So there's some things assessed with that as well. But yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and there's not a lot of
Oh, I think
research
we
on it.
might go back to it. What do you think?
I know, it's super interesting,
Yeah.
and not a lot of people talk about it. So
Yeah.
I'd like to learn more about it.
Cool.
So with delayed sleep, it's one of those things that if someone just naturally has this different circadian rhythm difference, do we change it? It becomes this thing of just really to the family of discussing what their needs are. The biggest issue tends to be school, and whether or not the school will be okay with adjustments of getting up a bit later. And one thing to point out, it's not always forever. We can cycle in and out of different circadian rhythm differences. I was delayed sleep phase as a kid. I used to tell people I slept with my eyes open because I just was there, just in bed. And teens tend to go into this as well. And I'm just looking for, where did my mouse go? There it is. Sorry. So with this, what will happen is I'll hear from families of, well, we've been just doing the bedtime routine at the time, an hour before we would like them to go to bed, hoping to make them sleepy. If it's someone with a circadian rhythm difference, they're really just not going to feel tired at that time. Even if you go through a whole bedtime routine, you're likely going to be putting someone to bed when they're just going to be laying in bed awake. And a worry with that, if we also are not allowing them to, if we're saying just stay in bed and they're not supposed to play with anything or do anything, but if someone who's like, I just am awake for 2 more hours, in neurodivergent people that we are much more likely to have intrusive thoughts. So very worrying thoughts. We talk about it a bit more in adults now these days, but it really happens down to our young kids too. I hear down to the preschool age kids that discuss things that are very worrying. So intrusive thoughts are things that, they're not true, but we just kind of tell ourselves and we worry about things. And it's a real concern in our community because we know that self-harm is we're at much higher risk. So it's a risk to put neurodivergent people in the rooms by themselves where we've told them, you can't keep yourself company with anything. You can't come back outside your room because then we just have someone sitting in their bed awake and now worrying about things. And we don't want that to be happening. Chronotherapy, I only added this in because I still see it on lists. This would not be something that you're involved in doing. I wouldn't either. It'd be under a specialist where they try to cycle someone's sleep. If it was going to bed at like 11, then to 11:30, 12, 1 a.m., and cycling people through to what would be considered an appropriate time to go to bed. This is actually considered incredibly dangerous by the people, adults and children. I just met a young teen who went through this. People are speaking out quite loudly about how dangerous this is and it has become for them because they're now in a non-24 hour sleep-wake cycle. So that means then, unfortunately, these people then they never really know when they're going to be awake or asleep. They're just constantly cycling through the clock. And because they don't know when they're going to be awake or asleep, you just can't figure out school, can't figure out work, can't figure out when they can go to the grocery store, appointments. And when people are in this, at this point in time, we have no help for them. This is a big piece of missing information on then what do we do for these people. So a lot of them are advocating for no more chronotherapy. So a lot of sleep clinics are removing this, but it's still on lists. Like Cerebus still had it on there, but they're pulling it off. So it's just something to kind of for you to know in the background. What might help, again, if someone's going to bed really late or the family feels like it's too late, go back to the first couple of things we talked about. reduce those demands, think about the schedule, those lifestyle changes. We don't need to be in activity after activity after activity. We need to focus on self-care. Bright light therapy has been really helpful for a lot of people, and a lot of young people as well. If there's someone that does just naturally fall asleep later, and if they're staying in school and maybe they can't have that adjustment of the time. So that's where you can get those bright lights. You can get them on Amazon, and you sit in front of it close to a couple feet away for about half an hour soon after you wake up. And it just helps all those feel-good hormones pop up for you to help and wake you up for the day. I don't know if anyone's been involved with bedtime fading. I haven't found it to be the most helpful for families. That would be where if a kid's going to bed at 10:30, then you do the bedtime routine to have them fall asleep at 10:30 for a handful of days or a week or two. And then you move it to like 10:15, then 10, then 9:45. I've found that for our families that might last for a matter of maybe some months, but then it tends to just revert, especially because of all like half terms, term breaks, summertime. And so again, if that really is a circadian rhythm difference for someone, they just end up reverting back to their time. So then I kind of sit with, when families ask about it, I go, I don't know if I really want to give you more work to do because I'm not sure what the outcome will be. I have kind of mixed, I hear just so much mixed. Some families, I hear from some other practitioners that some of their families, it works well, but the neurodivergent, I'm not really sure what the efficacy is with that. The last point, because someone always asks about melatonin, right? This is something that really needs to be discussed with a doctor. If you're in the UK, that's really how it's supposed to be done. So please have the families discuss that with a doctor. I know you can access gummies. I know you can get it from your American friends that bring it over. I would much prefer completely prefer that you talk to the doctor to do this, for so many reasons, because it is a hormone. And there's 2 different ways to be taking melatonin. And so that is something that people should be discussing with their doctor, because they're microdosing, that really needs to be discussed in fine-tuned detail. And in neurodivergent people, those side effects can really cause some other really big swings with like our eating and toileting. So we need to just be really aware of how much melatonin that's kid getting, and a doctor should be in charge of that. See the chat going.
There is a question about chronotherapy, but we're running out of time. So I wonder, we guys going to write you email probably tomorrow or day after about that. What is the difference between bedtime fading and chronotherapy? Because I think that kind of sounds.
It's just going the other way. It's just going the other way. It's either bringing you forward or going back, essentially. But it seems like moving you forward is really devastating to the system. Oops. Oh, I hit that. But actually, I was going to move the slide anyway, if that's okay. So I know we're, as you were saying, we're running out of time, but we're at the conclusion, so that's good. So I have found through the years with our families that the sleep can look quite different for our families. And it's really, really the foundations of it, again, is that co-regulation. Look at the daytime. Please look at the daytime. Please look at the daytime. And then with that, also the sensory needs, healthcare needs, all that continues throughout the night. So be really curious if someone's getting up, what's going on. And when you're doing all that, it becomes incredibly individualized to that young person. And I think it should just be my thank you. So yes, that is it for tonight. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you found it interesting. There's still a lot that I'm learning as well. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, that would be fantastic. You can find me around places. And I love talking about this stuff. So, and I've already written down notes for myself to take from here to look up. So this is great. Absolutely love it.
Okay, Tammy saying thank you. Desiree, thank you. Sue saying thank you. So thank you everyone very much for attending today. Being here. So hopefully we see you on another sessions as well. And me and Laura are going to be maybe discussing what else we can bring to you, because we all enjoy the webinar, or we call them expert seminars with you, Laura. So thank you again, everyone. You have a good night. And as I said, we're going to send you certificates and the slides tomorrow. So you take care and all the best. Bye-bye. Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Renata.
Bye, Laura, sorry.
Thank you for watching our video. For more London School of Childcare Studies content, see our social media or visit our website childcarestudies.co.uk.